1756. Moscow wakens to a disturbing sound, wheels scraping cobblestone, a carriage fleeing into the dawn, but what it leaves behind is far worse than any nightmare. A servant girl, dead, her skin flayed, her hair violently torn out. Neighbors are horrified, but they have no idea they've just uncovered the beginning of something far more sinister. Because this wasn't an isolated murder. This was the first clue, a breadcrumb in a trail of horror that would lead straight to the doors of nobility. Behind silk curtains and gold-lined halls lived a woman no one dared suspect, a pious widow, a devout churchgoer, a respected countess. Her name, Daria Saltykova. Her secret? She didn't rule her estate. She hunted it. And over the next decade, more than 100 souls would vanish in silence, beaten, boiled, burned alive. Not by a peasant, not by a monster from folklore, but by one of Russia's own aristocrats. Stay with us. What you're about to hear is not just the story of a serial killer, it's the unraveling of a system that allowed a noblewoman to become death itself. Born in 1730 into one of Russia's wealthiest aristocratic families, Daria Saltykova was raised in a world where status meant everything and human life meant almost nothing. As the daughter of nobility, she enjoyed privilege from birth, surrounded by luxury and influence in the heart of imperial Moscow. But the grandeur of her upbringing masked a darker reality, the brutal institution of serfdom. In 18th century Russia, serfs were not considered people, but property. They were bought, sold, beaten, and even killed at the whim of their masters without consequence. It was a system designed for exploitation, and for someone like Daria, it offered unlimited power over the lives of hundreds. Outwardly, she played the role of the devout noblewoman. She attended church regularly, donated generously to religious institutions, and maintained the pious appearance expected of a woman of her rank. But behind the veil of righteousness was a mind twisted by entitlement and cruelty. Daria's public acts of charity were a mask, carefully crafted to conceal the sadistic impulses that would soon turn her into one of Russia's most notorious killers. In her world, faith was performance and power meant control over life and death. In 1750, Daria Nikolaevna Ivanova married Gleb Alexeyevich Saltykov, a captain in the elite imperial guard and a member of one of Russia's most powerful noble families. The marriage elevated Daria's social standing and brought her into even closer proximity to the imperial court. Together, they had 2 sons, Theodore, born the same year as their wedding, and Nicholas a year later. For a time, Daria lived the life expected of a noblewoman, managing estates, raising children, and fulfilling her duties as a devoted wife. But that veneer of domestic normalcy would shatter just 5 years later. In 1755, Gleb Saltykov died suddenly, leaving Daria a wealthy widow at the age of 25. His death marked a turning point that would forever alter her life and the fate of hundreds. Without a husband or male relative to manage the inheritance, Daria assumed full control over 2 vast estates and more than 600 serfs. This newfound absolute power would unmask something far more sinister than grief. Freed from oversight and bolstered by legal and social immunity, Daria began a descent into cruelty that would turn her from a grieving widow into one of Russia's most feared and reviled figures. The widow's veil, it turned out, concealed far darker intentions. Once Daria Saltykova inherited absolute control over her estate, her descent into cruelty was swift and horrifying. With no husband, no oversight, and 600 serfs entirely under her dominion, she wielded unchecked power like a weapon. Her first known act of violence, the savage beating of a maid over a minor mistake, was not an outburst of rage, but the awakening of something far darker. Instead of remorse, she found pleasure in the suffering she caused, and it only escalated from there. Daria developed sadistic methods of torture that reflected her mood and whims. Some victims were bludgeoned to death with wooden rollers or searing hot irons. Others were forced to stand barefoot in the snow for hours until their bodies gave out to frostbite and hypothermia. She poured boiling water over the backs of young women, only to beat them afterward until they died. Children were not spared. She once shoved an 11-year-old down a flight of stairs, killing her instantly. In another twisted episode, she set a young girl's hair on fire. Even worse, she forced serfs to abuse each other, for her amusementspans beating their wives before her eyes. For Daria, human suffering had become a theater of entertainment. The turning point in Daria Saltykova's reign of terror came with the horrific death of a pregnant servant named Anicia Grigorova. Anicia had long endured the countess's unpredictable violence, but one day her luck ran out. In a fit of rage, Daria beat her mercilessly so brutally that both Anicia and her unborn child died from their injuries. The scene left even seasoned household staff shaken, but what followed marked a dramatic shift in the trajectory of Saltykova's impunity. A local priest was summoned to perform the burial, but when he saw the state of the woman's body, he refused. Her injuries were so grotesque, with deep bruising, torn flesh, visible signs of prolonged torture, that he deemed it unholy to proceed without a formal investigation. His refusal sparked whispers that reached beyond the estate walls and could no longer be silenced by bribes or fear. For years, Daria had evaded consequences, hiding behind her wealth and noble title. But Anicia's death was different. It was the first crack in the wall of protection surrounding the countess. The church's moral outrage finally forced local officials to acknowledge the unthinkable. A noblewoman might be a serial killer. The investigation that followed would shake the Russian Empire to its core. In 18th century Russia, power wasn't just a privilege, it was a shield against justice. For years, Countess Daria Saltykova used her aristocratic status and immense wealth to cover up the horrors unfolding within her estate. When whispers of her cruelty reached the ears of outsiders, she moved quickly to silence them. Police officers were bribed with coin, fine food, and even human lives. She gifted serfs to corrupt officials as if they were trinkets. Complaints filed by grieving families were swiftly buried, their authors punished with exile or imprisonment. One officer, trusted by Daria, even coached her on how to evade suspicion. The system that should have protected the innocent instead became her accomplice. With each payoff and each silenced voice, her crimes deepened, growing more savage under the cloak of untouchable privilege. It wasn't just murder, it was murder with impunity. In a world where the nobility could manipulate the law, Daria turned her home into a private slaughterhouse, guarded not by walls, but by a network of bribes and fear. Her story is a chilling reminder: when justice is for sale, monsters thrive. And Daria Saltykova thrived for years, her blood-soaked reign hidden behind the velvet curtains of Russian high society. In 1762, after years of silence, fear, and failed local petitions, the families of Daria Saltykova's victims took a desperate and dangerous step. They appealed directly to Empress Catherine II. Newly ascended to the throne, and eager to assert her authority and commitment to justice, Catherine took the allegations seriously. She bypassed the corrupt local officials and ordered a full-scale imperial investigation into the countess's crimes. The investigation would become one of the most extensive in 18th century Russia, lasting 6 years, from 1762 to 1768. Imperial authorities interviewed over 300 witnesses, including surviving serfs, household staff, and neighbors. The testimonies painted a chilling portrait of systematic cruelty, beatings, burnings, mutilations, and psychological torment. Numerous mutilated bodies had been seen removed from Saltykova's estate, and the sheer volume of consistent evidence became impossible to ignore. Although over 130 deaths were tied to Daria, only 38 cases could be legally proven beyond doubt. Still, the scale of the horror shocked even the most seasoned investigators and court officials. What began as whispered rumors of a cruel noblewoman had now grown into an undeniable truth-zone that reached the throne itself and demanded justice. At her trial, Daria Saltykova refused to confess. Her defense was chilling in its simplicity. "I know nothing. I did nothing." But the evidence was overwhelming: hundreds of testimonies, mutilated bodies, and a trail of terror that spanned years. Still, punishing her posed a serious problem. Daria was not only a noblewoman but also a widow from a powerful family. And since the death penalty had been officially abolished in Russia in 1754, Empress Catherine II faced a delicate political challenge: how to punish a countess without provoking the wrath of the aristocracy. The solution was both symbolic and severe. In 1768, Daria was paraded before the public in Moscow's Red Square, shackled with heavy chains and forced to wear a sign reading, "This woman tortured and murdered." It was a spectacle of public disgrace, designed to humiliate her and send a warning to others. Following her public shaming, Daria was sentenced to life imprisonment in total darkness. She was locked away in a windowless dungeon beneath the Ivanovsky convent, under constant surveillance by a nun. After 11 years in solitary confinement, she was moved to a small cell with a single barred window, her only glimpse of the outside world, until her death in 1801. Daria Saltykova died in 1801 at the age of 71, after spending 33 years imprisoned in near-total isolation. But her legacy did not die with her. Her case became a powerful symbol proof that not even the nobility could escape justice when their crimes were monstrous enough. More than just a personal tragedy, her story helped expose the brutal dehumanization inherent in Russia's serfdom system. Even in a society accustomed to violence against peasants, Saltykova's sadism stood out as horrifying and unacceptable. In modern psychological terms, she likely suffered from a severe personality disorder, exhibiting traits of sadistic psychopathy. But mental illness alone cannot explain or excuse the horrors she committed. Her actions were enabled and, even encouraged by, a system that gave aristocrats absolute power over the powerless. Saltykova wasn't just a murderer, she was the product of a society that treated human lives as disposable property. Today, her name serves as a dark reminder of what can happen when unchecked privilege and systemic injustice collide. The Countess of Blood remains one of Russia's most reviled historical figures, not only for her cruelty, but for what she represents. The terrifying truth that power, without accountability, can turn people into monsters and turn society into their playground.